This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
So this is actually going to be my second recording session for the day. I wasn't actually planning on doing it tonight, but I don't want to postpone it. You got 3 different segments to cover for this Friday show, and if I don't pre-record the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view now, it's just going to be too much stuff that I try to cram in throughout the week. And I don't want to do double recording sessions tomorrow or Tuesday. So I'm a little exhausted, but that's okay. We're going to power through this Halloween Havoc recap, and we'll do the Midsouth and world-class portions of the review at some point later on. But folks, you are tuned into the Friday edition of the Five Starr Wrestling Report, the wrestling podcast nobody knows but everyone needs. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and give the show a like for me. And I think I'm just going to dive right into the pay-per-view recap because there's a lot to cover with it, and Lord knows this podcast is already going to be extremely long to begin with. So let's do it. Here we go. The inaugural Halloween Havoc pay-per-view, where the spoopy journey began. We all know WCW's mantra with trying to replicate every bad sports entertainment model the WWF was using during the time. Question was, how crazy were they actually going to get with the production? Were they going to cake the entire ring set with pumpkins and coffins and spooky thunder effects all night? Well, surprisingly, they actually didn't go too overboard with the theatrics. We had a fairly basic stage set with a couple Halloween-themed gimmicks. We also had Gordon Soley and Chris Cruz doing interviews in front of some generic-looking cobwebs, and I don't really know what Chris was standing in front of. Dead tree branches, sticks. The point is, it wasn't ridiculously distracting. It's not like something you'd come to expect with WWE now, where they have to dress the whole thing up and make it look as tacky and childish as humanly possible. As we're well aware, having done the syndicated TV reviews in the build-up to this thing, they were live from the Philadelphia Civic Center. 7,300 people in attendance for this event. And I could be wrong. I'd actually have to confirm it. I believe this pay-per-view actually did a better buy rate than Starrcade would wind up doing in December. And that's obviously a reflection on how better the product has been since Flair took the book over the summer, when things were really spiraling out of control. They were getting a lot of trust back with the fans. The TV ratings were up. Pay-per-view buys had slightly increased. The one thing, again, they really weren't gaining back in large quantities were the house show attendance figures. But there were also other factors that helped make this event successful. They actually bothered to promote a full pay-per-view card ahead of time, so the people knew what they were getting. And again, it's the first Halloween Havoc event, so you were going to have natural intrigue from the fans anyway. I did manage to find this one on one of the WWE Vault channels. It's actually a WCW Vault channel that the company's running completely separately. There's some cool stuff on there. I might actually have to go peruse some of that in my free time. Because I'm pretty sure they're also uploading a lot of the syndicated shows. And once they leave Peacock next year, a lot of people are going to be migrating to that channel in droves. But we'll go ahead and run down the whole thing starting from the top. The opener was Mike Rotunda versus Tom Zank. I'm coming at this review with the assumption that everybody's been paying attention to the Saturday TBS recaps, so I'm not going to regurgitate all my previous talking points about the Z-Man. Bob Caudle and JR called this a gut check match for Zank, and that's pretty much what they laid out as the story going in. They didn't really devote a whole lot of attention to this feud on TV, if you can even call it a feud. It was a way for them to give Zank a big pay-per-view win over an established name, and also continue their attempts in making anybody actually care about the poor bastard. Really didn't have a whole lot to say about it. Rotunda's always good in these prelim/underneath roles. And I don't mean that as a knock on him as a talent, but let's be honest, this is always supposed to be a Tom Zank showcase. Rotunda was just there to simply do the job and help get him over. It was a lot of the usual standard stuff you come to expect with a Mike Rotunda match. A lot of stalling, a lot of complaining and lying about unfair tight pulling, a lot of using the ropes to his advantage during submission spots. Crowd was kind of in and out throughout a lot of it. They did the occasional Syracuse sucks chant to get under his skin. I think at one point somebody tried to start a retardo chant. Throwback to the Varsity Club days when he and Rick were still feuding. And Rick Steiner kept calling him Mike Retardo every week on TV. Good times. But eventually Zank made a comeback after he was getting worked over. Rotunda tried for a crossbody out of the corner, but Zank rolled through and caught him with a surprise small package to get the 3. Like I said, it served its purpose. I've already said a lot about the whole Tom Zank experiment in WCW. Another moderately good-looking young guy that they try to bring in and push to the moon. Unfortunately, Zank never really figured out the charisma side of things, so you basically just got a really solid athlete who could do a lot of moves, but couldn't draw money with green paper and crayon if you gave it to him. Not trying to belittle the guy, but it is what it is. He just never clicked for a lot of people, myself included. Still a fine opener, though. And then we pitched to Cruz's side of the interview set for a promo with Bruno Sammartino. Yes. In case you all immediately forgot about that whole hat on a hat on a hat stipulation for the Thunderdome Cage. All the bells and whistles they had booked going into that thing. They also just nonchalantly let everybody know ahead of time that Bruno would be involved as the guest ref. Because he was a big draw in Philly during his prime. So why not? I can only imagine what he was thinking when they asked him to be a part of that whole calamity. Aside from probably saying to himself, hey man, I'm just here for the paycheck. I'll do whatever the hell they want me to do. Not to get too personal here, but I've had several conversations with Bruno at various points in my life. Unfortunately, never as an adult. I think the last time I spoke with him in person was in middle school. They were very surface level conversations. The thought never occurred to me to ask him about officiating the Thunderdome Cage match at Halloween Havoc 89. To be blunt, I'd have been shocked if he remembered. So from there, we had this 6-man tag with Dr. Death and the Midnight Express taking on the Samoan SWAT team. And since they needed a third Samoan to fill out the remaining members of the heel squad, we had the Samoan Savage teaming up with Fatu and Samu. And the Samoan Savage, for those that might not know, it was Samuel Fatu, brother of Rikishi and the former Umaga. Also Jacob Fatu's father. How about that? Don't you love the family resemblance? You know, I'm surprised WWE never ran with that as Jacob Fatu's gimmick. They were calling him the Samoan Werewolf when I was last paying attention to anything. Surprised they never just adopted his father's gimmick name to call him the Samoan Savage. Would have made perfect sense. And seriously, if you think I'm kidding, go look at this footage of Sam Fatu from 1989. Tell me he doesn't look exactly like fucking Jacob. Shit's scary. Oh yeah, and since they canned Paulie's ass after the Great American Bash, guess who's back to manage the Samoans? Sir Oliver Humperdinck. Last time we saw Humperdinck in WCW, pretty sure he was still managing Bam Bam Bigelow. Then they both disappeared. I think Bam Bam went back to Japan, and I don't know what the fuck happened to Humperdinck. No, obviously, we know the history between the Midnights and the Samoans dating back to the spring. Little bit of a different scenario when you take away the involvement from Paulie. The chemistry between these teams were never great. But I think a lot of that had to do with the way the Samoans were always told to never sell or register anything for the opposing team. And because Bobby and Stan were still the babyfaces during that feud, and there really wasn't a whole lot they could do to make the matches interesting, except to get their butts kicked for the entire match, and then lose with a flat finish. With that all said, two things became abundantly clear after having seen this. Number one, Jim Ross proved why he's the greatest play-by-play commentator in the history of wrestling. Just spewing one factoid after another about every single individual in this match. He was such a brilliant mind. Always did his homework, always came prepared. Can't ever say enough good about JR as a commentator. Even during his bad days when he got older, crankier, more jaded, and less motivated. And number two, more importantly, this match right here proved beyond a shadow of a doubt, even when your booking is absolute dog shit, and the company makes every concerted effort to get you under as a talent as opposed to over, none of that matters if you can find a way to go out there and get the people invested. Think about this too. They randomly announced this match like a week or two back on TV with no context whatsoever. Right in the middle of them doing a story on TV where the Midnights were beefing with the Dynamic Dudes. I think it was just during a pre-tape where they casually announced this match was happening on pay-per-view. So with all that in mind, no feud, no on-camera face-to-face interaction, no reason to care at all, they still went out there and found a way to get the people creaming themselves with excitement. And you know, the formula was really simple. Dr. Death is a big, strong motherfucker that can pick up dudes and throw them around. So all he had to do was get in there and toss around the Samoans like babies for a good chunk of it. That got the people excited. You had Bobby and Stan working great as the underdog babyfaces during the heat. Bobby especially. My God, dude. Bobby Eaton deserves all the credit in the world for his performance here. He had absolutely no reason to go out there to bump around and kill himself like he did. But he's doing everything to make the Samoans look like badasses. He's taking flip bumps on the concrete floor, stumbling around and falling into the ropes like somebody shot him point blank with a gun. He was just remarkable in this match. And it really is ironic, too. All those matches the Midnights and the Samoans had in the spring where they actually spent time on TV making a feud out of it. And for the most part, the payoff stunk. Those same teams come out here for a random throwaway six-man in the middle of a card. They have easily the best match they've ever had together on pay-per-view. Now, with that said, as great as everything was here, it didn't come without its drawbacks. It was all going seamlessly until Stan tagged in at the very end and started fucking up shit left and right. I actually started laughing. I felt so bad for the guy. Dr. Death gets this white-hot tag from Beautiful Bobby. He gets in there and starts press slamming around the Samoans. Crowd is going absolutely insane. It's the best 2 minutes of chaos we've seen on a WCW pay-per-view, and I don't even know how long. And right as shit's getting good, they have Humperdinck and Cornette getting into an altercation at ringside. Stan tags in. First, he royally screws up a neckbreaker spot with Sam Fatu. I don't even know how it happened, but he went in the completely wrong direction with Fatu. And they both crashed and burned in a heap. And if that wasn't bad enough, Stan gets up and starts trying to make a comeback of his own, where he proceeds to hesitate trying to do a karate kick spot on one of the Samoans. So they're just standing there looking at one another for a solid 10 seconds before Stan finally called an audible and started throwing terrible windmill punches. He got completely lost. He went for a cover. And then, well, some other random shit happened, which led to Stan accidentally bumping Corny off the apron. And then Fatu hit Stan with some sort of clothesline and pinned him. Ugh. It was like absolutely perfect up until the closing minute. Then it completely fell off the map. It was the equivalent to failing to climax at the height of a blowjob. They were right there, and then the come didn't come, for lack of better terms. Now, yes, you can obviously tell that Stan bumping Cornette is going to lead to something on television. I mean, they've already planted the seeds that there's dissension between the two. Take nothing away from the end. This is by far my favorite match on the entire card. And again, man, it all demonstrates why the Midnight Express, to me, rank among the all-time great tag teams. They were at the bottom of the barrel here in terms of where they stood in the pecking order. I mean, the only team Jim Herd hated more than the Midnights were the Dynamic Dudes. This is where they were positioned in the fall of '89. Just another tag team. But man, they went out there and threw it back in Jim Herd's face, didn't they? Try and get any other babyface tag team on the roster to generate that fan response, fucker. Spoiler. The Dudes did not generate that kind of reaction. I'll circle back to the dudes in a minute. First, let me rapidly gloss over this snooze fest between Tommy Rich and the Cuban Assassin. They had a very boring and sloppy wrestling match that nobody gave a rat's ass about. The last thing they needed to have follow that six-man was a fucking armbar city contest with Tommy Rich. Which is exactly why everybody in the building started chanting boring within a matter of minutes. I will once again reaffirm, never had anything bad to say about Tommy Rich. I understand he was a big draw in the NWA in the late 70s. The fact of the matter is that it was now 1989. And since he's made his return to WCW, he has not had one single match worth giving a crap about. That is a fact. No matter how you want to try to spin it. He won with a Thez press. So the dudes. Let's go over this World Tag Team title match between them and the Freebirds. Michelle Hayes and Ginny Garvin. See my most recent TBS review if you're wondering. So let's recall the story behind this title match. Jim Cornette, who is now serving as Johnny and Shane's advisor, he originally petitioned to try to get the Freebirds to face the Midnights for the belts, which would have been a rematch from the tag team tournament they booked right before the Bash Tour kicked off, when the Freebirds beat the Midnights in the finals. But somehow the Birds managed to work around that, and for whatever reason, the match didn't get signed. So as a backup, Cornette did get the Freebirds to agree to put the belts on the line against the Dynamic Dudes. Seeing as how they're inferior opposition, shouldn't be an issue for the Freebirds to beat these two young punks, right? Now see, that story might actually be compelling on paper if 99.9% of people didn't already agree that Johnny and Shane were two inferior punk kids. So you now enter a scenario where the alleged babyface challengers go in, already being counted out by both their opponents and the fans writ large. Not a good sign for what was to come. So they ring the bell to start the match. And first of all, the ring gear of the dudes, it cannot be overstated. This was the god ugliest fucking ring gear I think I've ever seen. Bright orange trunks with a neon green strip on the back that read dudes in generic font. It literally looked like a piece of painter's tape they just stuck back there. Rinky-dink. Just like everything about the dude's gimmick. So they're out there running wild in the early goings. Almost every single offensive move these guys are doing, the fans either responded by booing outright, or they chanted, "You suck" at them. And I think once the reality set in that the people were going to shit on the dudes no matter what they did here, the entire flow of this match completely came to a grinding halt. It just got progressively worse and worse. Johnny Ace, dude, he was all over the fucking place in this thing. And like at one point, you actually see Garvin walk over to Hayes to talk to him. Probably to ask, what the hell are we supposed to do? By that point, I think they just figured, fuck it. They're cheering us. let's just start working like the babyfaces. And so Hayes goes to tease the DDT on Johnny Ace, which everyone pops for. But then Johnny cold tags Shane for the not-so comeback. And then after the dudes try to hit their wipeout on Garvin, Hayes picks Shane's ankle so Garvin could pin Johnny, who I do not believe was the legal partner at the time, but at that point I don't really think it mattered. I wrote, awful match. Way worse than the Skyscrapers Road Warriors match. It wasn't even in the same ballpark. I had zero expectations for that Skyscrapers match, and they at least somewhat exceeded them. This one, I did not remember it being this bad. The only thing I remember going in about this tag match was that it was short and everybody hated the dudes. I gravely neglected the part about the match also sucking a massive throbbing dick. Which is precisely what all the fans wanted Shane and Johnny to do after it was over. Easily one of the worst matches in the year 1989. I don't even know how you can dispute that. It was both lousy and hideous to watch. Moving on, which is probably the best thing we can do. Let's talk about the debut of Doom, the mystery tag team that woman's been holding over the Steiner brothers for weeks now. I remember this debut vividly. I think I instinctually knew that it was Ron Simmons and Butch Reed under the Black Hoods. To me, though, Woman was always the star of that group. She was the glue that held that package together. She came out here leading Simmons and Reed down to the ring. She was just such the perfect fit. And not to jump ahead here, but the thought did occur to me. When they swapped managers later on and put Teddy Long in Woman's place, I mean, Teddy was great too, don't get me wrong. But there was always something about Nancy in this role that visually always looked right. Like, yeah, Teddy was always going to be able to cut better promos to get them over, which might have been why they made the change in the first place. But Nancy had presence. I think the novelty had quickly worn off, though, by that point, so it wasn't a huge deal. You know, by the time Teddy started managing them, they had already unmasked Ron and Butch. They were already booked into oblivion and not all that special anymore. I think they lost a match to the Steiners where they had to unmask, and yeah, the whole thing was badly butchered. But when Doom first arrived, they were a big deal. Now, you can definitely make the argument, especially when you analyze their debut match here with the Steiners, probably did a little more selling than what you would have liked to see, especially for a newer heel tag team they're trying to establish. I would dispute that notion, although I understand the criticism. They needed to at least give the Steiners a little modicum of revenge over everything we've seen Woman put them through in the last couple months. Knowing that Doom was supposed to go over here, I mean, he didn't want to simultaneously beat the Steiners flat in a one-sided squash. I mean, that wouldn't have done Rick and Scott any favors, especially as a babyface tag team. But for everything that Freebirds Dynamic Dudes tag match wasn't, this match made up for it in spades. You had the hot jump start with Rick and Scott going right after Doom and beating him from pillar to post. They're hitting from all cylinders and making Doom their punching bags from out of the block. There was a great moment in this match where JR drew attention to Rick's new arm tattoo. The whole backstory, I'm not even kidding you. Rick got a tattoo of a bulldog, and when JR went to ask him why he didn't get a tattoo of a Wolverine, Rick responded with, "'Cause I wanted a dog." God, that is such a Rick Steiner answer. I wanted a dog. Short and sweet to the point. No further explanation necessary. I was also a fan of when JR mentioned how he overheard women talking strategy with Doom earlier in the day. And as he's pointing out how much of a taskmaster she was in getting Doom prepared for this big debut, they go to a shot of her at one point where you hear her yell, "Get those Steiners." That was apparently the strategy. Get the Steiners. Great plan. Well thought out. And yes, you eventually had Doom cut off Scotty with a knee to the back so they could take over and get the heat. You know, it's funny, I'm paying close attention to Ron and Butch throughout the match. I obviously know what they look like, even with the masks. So I pretty much knew the entire time who was who. Believe it or not, Simmons was actually bigger than Reed. Which is really saying something, because Reed was fucking jacked. But then I would also get those moments of clarity where I hear Butch freak out at Nick Patrick after a near fall attempt. And I'd be like, oh yeah, that's Hacksaw. Trash talking the official and getting all worked up. Classic Butch Reed. So, well, they're out there having a really well-paced back-and-forth match. They did a false tag to Rick right before Scott got a hope spot and made the real hot tag. And as the four guys are brawling in the ring, Scotty and I think it was Butch who rolled out to the floor. And while Patrick's trying to get them back to their corners, you see Woman walk up and stuff a phony gimmick inside Ron's mask. So when Rick tries for the belly-to-belly, Ron headbutts Rick and knocks him out to get the pin. And see, to me, this is always why Woman served as a better heater for Doom than Teddy. Like with Woman, you knew the boys couldn't get physical with her, so she had a way to get heat on herself while also remaining somewhat untouchable. And because she was so great in that bitchy, underhanded heel role, it made everything work so much better. So yeah, overall great match. A stark contrast to everything we saw in the previous tag bout. So that took us to the U.S. Heavyweight title match between Lex Luger and Brian Pillman. What I could claim is the feud that had the most overall crowd investment going into the pay-per-view. The way they built this up on television, the back and forth between Pillman and Luger on camera when we saw them brawling together. I mean, nothing on the syndicated shows came close to getting reactions like the Luger-Pillman stuff. And maybe it's personal bias. Maybe it's because I have such fond memories of a lot of aspects about 1989. Despite how much I've clearly forgotten now that we're actually going back and reliving the whole timeline. This is one of my personal favorite Pillman matches to go back and watch. And it really isn't a match that I would say is super memorable. He and Flair wrestle a TV match in February of next year that people rave about. And for good reason. Because that match was also phenomenal. A star-making performance for Pillman, no question. But this also was 100% a star-making performance for Brian. There was a ton of pressure going in for him, whether you want to believe it or not. His first major pay-per-view match going up for a U.S. title. Wrestling at the time one of the top heels. I mean, this wasn't like a Tom Zank situation where they just threw him out there to wrestle an 8-minute prelim match. This was Brian's opportunity to really showcase what he could do on a bigger stage. And he delivered. He proved to the company why he was someone they should have put money into and capitalized on to make a top babyface champion at some point in the next year or two. Which is clearly in the works before the booking committee got swapped around and shit went awry again. But this whole match was all about spotlighting Brian. And Luger, to his credit, even though he was always slated to go over, he got Pillman over exceedingly well here. I mean, the entire layout to the match, not just the match, the entire feud, from day one, it was all about Luger underestimating Pillman's ability and viewing him as somebody beneath his level. And when it finally came to throw hands, Luger found out that Pillman was fully capable of holding his own. So they go out there for this match, and from the onset, Luger cannot get out of the gate. He's getting out-wrestled at every turn, playing defense and doing everything to keep away from Pillman. And as he's getting more visibly frustrated throughout the match, he starts feeding off the fans by telling them to all shut up. He's screaming and jaw-jacking with everyone. It's a brilliantly put-together match. Was it the cleanest match from start to finish? No, probably not. But to my knowledge, there weren't any visible moments where it looked like Pillman was getting lost or anything. If anything, Luger was the one pretty gassed by the end of it. And I love the whole finishing sequence where Pillman's firing back on Luger. He finally hits Eric Pillman, which everybody goes ballistic for. The only nitpick I had, and it's a major one because JR completely telegraphed the near fall as soon as he mentioned it. When Pillman hit Luger with his finish, the first words out of JR's mouth were, "He's too close to the ropes." So it completely killed the drama when Luger got his foot under the bottom rope. Would have been so much more effective had they milked that moment and didn't draw attention to it ahead of time. A rare Jim Ross brain fart on the pay-per-view. But it led to this awesome spot where Pillman went for a missile dropkick but crashed and burned. Then Luger capitalized and gave him the stun gun over the ropes for the pin. And as soon as Luger pinned him, he rolled out of the ring and powdered to the back as quickly as possible. Didn't overstay his welcome. Didn't stick around to let Pillman recover. He said, "I've had enough of this. I'm getting the fuck out of Dodge while I can still breathe." It was flawless. Like I said before, it's all about showcasing and getting Pillman over. No, he didn't necessarily have to win the title to get over, but he came out looking like a megastar. It really is a shame, and I know I've mentioned this a couple times previously, but it's a shame that they never really expanded on the Luger-Pillman stuff beyond, I think, the November Clash. Once they wrapped everything up there, both guys went their separate ways and didn't really have much interaction after the fact from what I recall. Yes, there's everything coming up in February of '90 with Sting getting injured and them having to fast track a Luger face turn. But they still had a couple months in between where they could have maybe done one more big blow-off over the title, which ideally could have been the time to put the U.S. strap on Pillman, had they decided to go that road. I don't know. Coulda, woulda, shoulda. So then we had the Road Warriors versus Skyscrapers match I was dreading. Although after having watched that Freebird Dude fiasco, this is a fucking 5-star classic by comparison. Yet again, the Road Warriors find themselves in an irresistible force and movable object feud, which never boded well in their favor for a variety of reasons. In the case of them working with Sid and Spivey, Spivey was fucking rotten, and Sid rarely sold as it was. Looking back, this is probably the most amount of selling we've seen from either Sid or Spivey in 1989. It was still very minimal. Even during the moments in the match where the Road Warriors were supposed to be in control, you can tell Spivey and Sid didn't really want to cooperate. I'm honestly shocked Hawk and Animal didn't start shooting on him. Really, it's not even worth me spending 5 minutes trying to break everything down. Hawk and Animal got the early advantage over the Skyscrapers until Animal got cut off and worked over for a bit. There was a tame heat portion where the crowd just kind of sat around and waited for the Road Warriors to start making their comeback. The entire time, I'm watching Teddy hold that giant obnoxious key at ringside. I could already call the finish a mile ahead of time. So eventually all four guys get in there and start doing sloppy big men spots. Then as Teddy went to feed Spivey the key, he just clubbed Hawk over the back of the head with it for the DQ. Wherein Hawk sold it by taking a bump head first on the ring apron and then splatting on the floor like a pancake. Thought he was immediately dead. And, well, the Skyscrapers got a little bit of heat on Animal afterward until Hawk ran back in and grabbed the key to run Spivey and Sid off. As I stated, it's the most amount of selling and or defensive maneuvers I've seen from Sid and Spivey all year. So I guess I can't completely bury them for being unprofessional jag-offs. And again, I say that as somebody who actually liked Sid growing up. But this is a rough patch in his career. You know, again, it was what it was. There was a lot of tag team wrestling on this card. When I look back, I'm still not entirely convinced that they needed to even put this on the Halloween Havoc pay-per-view period. Not only was it the semi-main, but it seemed more like a buffer match in between the US title and the Thunderdome Cage, which, frankly, I don't think they needed. Typically, I'm not opposed to more tag team wrestling, especially when it's good. This was one of those matches that didn't really demand a spot on the pay-per-view. I don't care how much of a mark Jim Herd was for the Skyscrapers. It was a complete bathroom break segment. But I'm not going to get hung up on that. Let's get to the big selling point for this pay-per-view. It was a night of firsts. Not only was it the inaugural Halloween Havoc pay-per-view, it was also the inaugural and simultaneously only Thunderdome Cage they ever booked in WCW. Probably for good reason, but I digress. It's Sting and Ric Flair teaming up to face the Great Muta and Terry Funk, with Ole Anderson serving as Sting and Flair's designated Terminator, and Gary Hart serving as Muta and Funk's. And again, Bruno was just casually inserted to be the guest referee because reasons. Now, in case you either forgot or maybe you've never seen the pay-per-view before, the Thunderdome Cage was a custom-made electrified cage gimmick, which kind of resembled a knockoff of both Hell in a Cell and that goofy Punjabi prison Dilya Bob, or whatever the WWE called that cage made of bamboo sticks. And they also dressed the cage up here by adding a bunch of Halloween decorations. There's actually a funny backstory that I think Jim Cornette has talked about on that Kayfabe Commentaries interview years back. And you can actually see it fleetingly on camera here before they cut away to try to not show it on the live feed. But right as they're about to ring the bell to start the match, one of the sparks at the top of the cage actually caught fire. So they had a production guy and Tommy Young try to run up to climb the cage to put the fire out. And I think you can peripherally see Muta blowing his mist up at it too. In fact, I think it was finally Muta who actually put the fire out successfully. Total badass move. Just scaling the cage and then blowing mist at it. Muta was the best. No, that wasn't an omen to signify how the rest of the match was going to go. I don't know what is. The crowd was laughing, obviously. That was a given. Because you knew it had to happen, right? First time ever they're trying out this gimmick on live pay-per-view. Why wouldn't the cage catch fire right before it was supposed to start? It had to. It still wasn't as comical as the idea that in a cage match that you would have already presumed was no DQ in the first place, why did both teams have to tag in and out? Well, guess it was either that or they'd have to deal with Bruno trying to enforce rules. Which, hey, I wouldn't want to cross Bruno. Muta tried that a couple times in this match, and I legitimately peed myself in fear for his life. The bigger problem they had here was that the whole selling point for this cage match was the fact that it was supposed to be electrified. But guys were constantly getting rammed into the side of the cage throughout the whole thing. They weren't even selling it like they were getting electrocuted. So the whole thing was essentially moot. And what makes it even sillier is that knowing there's a roof on this cage, knowing that there's no way for anybody to actually escape the damn thing, when everyone starts arbitrarily climbing the cage, Bob Caudle's on commentary making perfectly valid claims such as, I don't understand why they're climbing it to begin with. Just get down, guys. You're not going anywhere anyway. To which I say, man's got a point. What exactly is the objective of climbing a cage where you know it's only going to lead to getting shocked? This sounds like a very poor plan. And in fact, turns out there was no plan to begin with. They all just started climbing the cage because they thought it would be cool. Come to find out, they didn't even really bother using the electricity to their advantage. So after completely killing the intrigue of the electrified cage by not actually utilizing the electrical system, we get some incredibly awkward downtime where Flair decides to hang Funk upside down by his leg from the cage. Meanwhile, they cut to a shot of Sting holding Muta in an overhead press slam position for seemingly hours, teasing that he's going to throw Muta out to the floor. but then he just slams him down on the ring mat. The fans booed. Then at some point, Sting started swinging on the hangman's rope like Tarzan while Muta and Flair are in the ring doing wrestling spots. It was growing increasingly more difficult for me to maintain my composure by that point. So eventually the heels get Sting tied up in the cage so they could double team Flair. They hit him with a stuffed pile driver. And the big payoff there was so Ole could untangle Sting from the rope, so he could then do a giant leap off the top of the cage onto Funk, which did not lead to the finish. It led to more cage climbing and more awkward confusion for several more minutes. And then we finally get to the ending, which is still both a beautifully done yet ridiculous finish at the same time. Now again, remember what they set up on TV last week. Terry Funk made it perfectly clear to Gary Hart he did not want the towel to be thrown in under any circumstance. If Sting and Flair grabbed a 10-foot pole and jammed it up Funk's anal morphus, don't throw in the towel. If they pour gasoline on Funk and threaten to light him on fire, then let nature take its course, baby. So, figuring they had to find a way to still put the babyfaces over while somewhat paying attention to that story detail, here's what they came up with. Flair gets Funk in the figure four while Sting is perched on the top rope. And he comes down on Funk with a big body splash. And you see Funk signaling to Gary that he's had enough. But Gary's listening to what Funk told him beforehand. Under no circumstances does he throw in the towel. So Muta gets in the ring and tries to sucker punch Bruno, which is a bad move. So he gets laid out with the right hand. And as Gary climbs up to the ring apron, Ole runs over to throw a punch at Gary. And so as Gary takes the bump, he accidentally throws the towel in the air, which conveniently lands on Bruno's shoulder. And when Ole draws attention to it, Bruno sees the towel and he calls for the bell. Because he now assumes that Gary threw in the towel for his team. So, suspending disbelief for a minute and trying to buy the idea that Gary inadvertently threw the towel in the direction of Bruno, which conveniently landed on his shoulder, thus signaling the end of the match. Other than that, I guess it was a clever idea. There's a part of me that, having watched this match again after years and years of not having thought about it, I didn't like it very much when I was a kid. But as an adult, I really fucking hated this match. A lot. But I still can't call it like the worst match I've ever seen. It was still better than the Chamber of Horrors. To a lesser extent, still better than the Tower of Doom match we saw at Bash 88. Definitely not one of the better cage gimmick uses I've seen during my time. I mean, to me, what hurt him most was the fact that they completely undersold the electrical aspect of the cage. And there are ways it could have worked, guys getting shocked by trying to climb the cage. They didn't have to use lighting or sound effects or anything. Just something as simple as the guy selling God forbid, pretending to be electrocuted. Whatever. Point is, this match does not hold up. It really is an eye-opening pay-per-view, especially when you factor in the crowd. We've seen some pretty hostile WCW crowds, especially in the last year, having gone back to do these retrospectives. The smarter crowds were definitely becoming the predominant voices for a lot of what we've been seeing. This Philly crowd really drew attention to that change in dynamic. It was really prevalent in the Dynamic Dudes match when they just totally shit on everything Shane and Johnny did. But you could even sense it during some of the prelim bouts when they were chanting boring and just not really being into the mat holds and the slower paced parts of the matches. The business had definitely evolved by this point, but I think we were also entering the period where fans were willing to be more vocal about what they did and didn't like, especially on the big shows. Like, it used to be they would be more silent or disengaged with stuff they didn't particularly like. And now they're just openly ridiculing anybody they don't like, babyface or heel. And if a match is boring, they'll let you know. You know, we really don't think about it much now because we're in the crowd participation era of wrestling where fans just buy tickets to be a part of the experience and get themselves over. But as we're about to enter the 90s period with our WCW archive, pay special attention to the way the audience changes. These are not the same loyal fans that were buying tickets for the Bash Tour in 86 or 87. It's a very different culture now. All right, so now we can turn our attention over to Midsouth television. A very odd episode this week, to say the least. I guess it kind of fits with the theme of Halloween, doesn't it? At least Boyd Pierce color coordinated this time. The bright orange suit was quite festive, but not in a repulsive way like that pink thing he was wearing the other week. So here's how they open. They're doing the usual card rundown and opening remarks. Watts is going over a few key stories and news updates, one of which included him mentioning that Terry Taylor is going to be out of action with a spleen injury for about a month. And then he started going into this diatribe, for lack of better terms, where he's responding to all the fan mail the company's been getting regarding the use of weapon banning in Midsouth. And I kid you not, I had to watch this thing back a second time just to even figure out what the hell Watts was talking about, because it even confused me. Apparently, and this is coming directly from Watts, so I'm just recapping what I heard. Apparently, the Mid-South fans are all up in arms over them banning the use of chairs, chains, 2x4s, and tennis rackets, which is a storyline, by the way, that we have not heard mentioned on this program in about 3 months. And they are only now addressing the fact that the fans are pissed about it. So Watts' justification for this is something to the extent of, we can only try and regulate so much in the Mid-South area. We have no authority over the laws in this country, much less what we can control on our television show. And so for all the people that are upset about us having to ban the use of gimmicks, tough shit. I'm not even half kidding you. That was basically what the entire tirade was about. You're upset that we barred the use of weapons on TV? Well, too damn bad. It's for your own good. Gee. Well, that's really doing a swell job making your company come off like the babyfaces. Thanks for the corporate update, Bill. So after that really bizarre opening that made my head spin a few times, well, then we went to this Dr. Death pre-tape where he promised that he was going to bury Hacksaw Duggan later on. He also admitted to lying about forgetting his football helmet the other week. He was actually giving it a BJ. Buff job, people. Get your head out of the gutter. Oh, we'll revisit the Hacksaw Duggan situation. There is a lot to say about that one. From there, we went to the ring for an interview. It was actually time that General Akbar requested to make an important announcement. He says he's been searching far and wide to recruit a new member for his army. And that man is none other than the individual standing in the ring next to him, Mr. Buddy Landell. Not only one of the more underrated talents in the Midsouth area, but also one of the more, quote, productive. Not entirely sure what that means, but sure. I guess we can call Budrow productive. He's been more productive than their fucking North American champion Magnum TA. Say that much. Now in return, with Budrow being a new official member of the Akbar army, Buddy will be sure to pay Akbar back for every dime he was paid. He'll be the best damn hit job man in the Mid-South area. Now obviously they didn't get too specific about what that hit job would look like. But that's the deal they set up here. Buddy is now a part of Akbar's crew, and he's going to serve as the general's hitman for any task he's assigned. Perhaps jumping somebody in the parking lot. Foreshadowing. So then we had our first match on this week's show. Figuring it was Halloween, it was probably fitting that we'd see the return of the missing link to the Mid-South area. There's a good way to frighten all the children in attendance. I let out a very audible groan when I saw him pacing around the ring. He had a very short and somewhat painless match with Mike Jackson. Ended up going over with a headbutt to the spinal column. You know I wasn't craving to see the missing link back? On my bucket list of talents that I wanted to see return, he was not on that list. Just throwing it out there. So at that point, we came back for what was supposed to be the scheduled football helmet challenge between Dr. Death and Hacksaw Duggan. And they set this whole thing up a week ago on TV. Duggan made the challenge. Williams accepted. Two former football players putting their pride and legacy on the line in the squared circle. Winner take all. Well, change of plans. So everyone's waiting for the arrival of Duggan. And they're waiting. They're waiting. Duggan's not coming out. Immediately, Williams gets on the house mic and starts calling Duggan a coward, saying he's the one who issued the challenge in the first place, But now he's got cold feet because he realizes what he's actually up against. But who should eventually show up? Ted DiBiase in a fully dressed suit. Now, we did know that DiBiase was scheduled to make his return this week. What we didn't expect was him to show up with Hacksaw's football helmet. That's when DiBiase reveals what supposedly happened between him and Duggan in the parking lot. We know they have history. A lot of bad blood. Dating back to their time in the Rat Pack when Duggan did nothing more than hide in DiBiase's shadow. And like the coward he is, when DiBiase arrived to the building just a few minutes ago, Duggan tried to jump him. So DiBiase did what any man would do in that situation. He started throwing soup bones. And he laid out Duggan in the parking lot and left him for dead. But he also made sure to take his football helmet as a cash reward. Now, of course, you hear this story, and you start raising a bunch of red flags. The most glaring one being the one that Jim Ross mentioned here, when he goes, wait, hold on a second here. So we're to believe that Hacksaw Duggan tried to attack you from behind in the parking lot, and you just waltzed into the building totally unscathed? Not a wrinkle or scratch on you? You just walked in perfectly groomed? Well, that is apparently what DiBiase wants everyone to buy. Seems a little suspect, right? Thinking this murder mystery might have some layers to it. By far, best part of the whole segment, right before they cut back to the announcers, DiBiase hands Dr. Death the helmet. Dr. Death does not hesitate. He just goes, "That's right, I'm the man now." Absolutely perfect. The same guy that just called Duggan a coward minutes prior because he wouldn't come out to defend the honor of his helmet, DiBiase just hands the fucking thing to Steve, and he gleefully takes it and accepts it. Like he actually did anything to earn it. Perfect scumbag move. So at that point, we came back for some pre-tape comments from Jim Cornette. This is where he revealed that he's got an unsigned check for $25,000. And if the Rock and Roll Express have the guts to accept the Midnight's challenge to defend the tag belts, not only will Corny put up the $25,000, but he'll even let the Rock and Roll name the stipulation for the match. That's how confident he is that his boys can win the gold back on their first try. Clever scheming or desperation? Let's come back to that when Ricky and Robert answer the challenge later on. That brought us to Hacksaw Butch Reed versus Brickhouse Brown. And what we had here was a prime example of a very middle-of-the-road TV match with about 2 minutes of really exciting action toward the end. These guys are out there just kind of going through the motions for a while. It's not bad, but it's not really good either. But then Hacksaw starts getting cocky, and he tosses Brickhouse out to the concrete floor like a lawn dart. And because we know that Reed recently had surgery on his left knee, Brickhouse decides to fight fire with fire. And he picks Reed's leg and starts going to town by ramming it against the ring apron several times. And all of a sudden, these guys are out there having a fucking grudge match. Went from practically 0 to 100 in less than a minute. Now Reed's selling the leg and trying to work defense against Brickhouse during the comeback. And right as it looks like Brickhouse is going to seal the deal, Hacksaw dodges a missile dropkick attempt, gives Brickhouse a big press slam, then he drops the leg over him to get the pin. The injured leg, mind you. But, I guess it wasn't bothering Hacksaw that much. As noted, it went from boring and sluggish to pretty damn good. Just like that. All it took was Hacksaw dumping Brickhouse out to the floor like a sack of wheat. Then he decided, all right, motherfucker, you want to play dirty? Let's play dirty. The action became great. Or at least, well, light years better than when it first started, like. It did kind of resonate by the end. The fact that Watts has clearly already given up on Brickhouse Brown. Now he's got him out there doing clean jobs for cold matches in the middle of the show. Hey. It was a decent run while it lasted. With that all out of the way, though, time to get serious for a minute. Because we need to talk about what really happened to Hacksaw Duggan. Enough putting off this Scooby-Doo murder mystery. This is another one of those all-time segments, man. A Mid-South moment that sticks with you and becomes a special part of history. Duggan's performance in this thing was outstanding. The way he delivered this promo should have earned him consideration for Promo of the Year in 1984. You could take every sports entertainment WWE promo in the last decade and shove it up your rear end. Ain't nothing comes close to matching the level of realism and authenticity that Duggan demonstrated here. So they come back from break. Watts is standing with Pee Wee Anderson and Carl Fergie at ringside as they're trying to escort Duggan out of the building to get him to an ambulance. Because this poor bastard's in rough shape. He's caked from head to toe in blood, battered and bruised, clothes torn, just a mangled fucking mess. But he's got a message he wants to deliver before he goes. He wants everyone to know what went down in the parking lot. It's not what DiBiase claimed, that's for sure. Duggan was getting his bags out of the trunk of his car right before he was jumped from behind and attacked. He doesn't know what the object was. Could have been a blackjack. But it was strong enough to leave Duggan laying on the concrete. And for a moment, Duggan was able to glance up and see DiBiase was one of the guys that attacked him. And there were at least 3 others, but he couldn't get a clear visual on them. All he knows is that DiBiase tried to stop Duggan from showing up today. But he's not going to give DiBiase the satisfaction of claiming that he left Duggan broken and mangled in the parking lot. He can still walk, damn it. And you know, it wasn't just Duggan's delivery here that makes this an all-time great Mid-South moment. It's the fans, man. The fans are just hanging on to every last word. They are dead silent as Duggan's struggling to cut this promo. They're not laughing. They're not crying. They're not cheering. They're just stone silent. They let Duggan say his piece. And then right as they're helping him away from ringside, well, that's when everyone starts applauding and showing their sign of respect. Like when an athlete goes down in the field with an injury and everybody at the stadium stays quiet until he's back on his feet. That was how they treated the Duggan situation. I really can't stress enough how brilliantly this was all done. You truly cannot replicate something like this if you tried it a million other times. They did this all in one take and it was beautifully executed. One of my favorite personal Hacksaw Duggan moments. Not even just strictly talking promos. I'm talking career moments. That's how good it was. So after the dust settled, we came back for this North American title match between Magnum TA and Ernie Ladd. The match approximately 5.5 months in the making. The one we were supposed to get on television a while back, but Ernie no-showed when he found out Bill Watts didn't book the match to go on first. Yes, I still remember that. It was very goofy. And they surely made us wait for this payoff. But what a payoff it was. One of the most genius heat ploys I've seen in a Mid-South title match since Adrian Street smooched his way to the television title from Terry Taylor. This is amazing. So they're out there having the match. Magnum's doing his fiery babyface flurry on Ladd. And right as Magnum goes to hit a big missile dropkick, Ernie accidentally bumps Carl Fergie. There's a near fall attempt where Magnum goes for a cover, but Fergie's too slow to make the count in time. And, Fergie actually gets bumped the second time, but now he goes flying through the ropes. And that gives Ernie the opportunity to pull out a gimmick from his trunks and start choking Magnum while the officials can't see him. But here's where Ernie thinks one step ahead. The genius, clever-minded veteran he was. He's been down this road before. He doesn't want to make it totally apparent to the referees that Magnum's out like a light. So in order to make it seem like Magnum is still in the fight, Ernie goes to pick up Magnum for a power slam, and he pretends to fall back with Magnum still in his arms, so it looks as if Magnum's going for a pin attempt. That was fucking brilliant. And then flash forward a minute later, Ernie goes to drop a pair of legs over Magnum's unconscious body for the 1, the 2, and the 3. New North American champion by cracky, Ernie fucking Ladd. In 1984, the broken, battered shell of an athlete he once was still had enough juice left in the tank to be able to outsmart the previous babyface champion. Remarkable. I legitimately popped when Ernie fell back with Magnum in his arms, all to make it seem like he went for a counter pin attempt. Nobody does anything like that in wrestling anymore, man. That was a level of intellect that went beyond anybody's ability to comprehend. And you could see just how proud he was as he's holding up that belt right before they cut away. He knew he got one over on the people, and he was going to savor that moment for everything it was worth. The big cat, man. Nobody else like him. Speaking of remarkable segments, another all-time Mid-South moment took place this week. Some real major bombshells dropping, gotta say. They went all out with making this show a must-see episode. Now, we remember earlier, the Rock and Roll were going to come out and answer the challenge laid out by Cornette. If they put their Mid-South tag titles on the line against the Midnights, Corny will offer up $25,000, and he'll also let the Rock and Roll choose a stipulation for the match. And seeing as how Ricky and Robert are fair-minded people, they're not going to do something dramatic like force Bobby and Dennis to wrestle with one arm tied behind their back. No, what they're going to do instead is force JC's back against the wall. Seeing as how he was the difference maker in costing the Rock and Roll the Mid-South tag titles to begin with earlier this year. They're going to make Jim Cornette wear a straitjacket at ringside. That way he has no chance of helping his team steal the belts back. Pretty wise move, one might think. Probably would be easier just to outright ban Cornette from the building altogether, but then again, had they done that, they wouldn't have been able to pull off this angle they shot here. Now, in hindsight, this whole angle made the Rock and Roll look incredibly stupid. If you're a smarter fan watching, you immediately knew what was going to happen before they even put Robert in the straitjacket as a demonstration. So they reveal the straitjacket, and Ricky decides, I'm going to have Robert wear this thing just to let everyone know what Cornette's going to have to deal with. Poor decision on his part. And it wasn't even the idea that he put the straitjacket on Robert. It was the idea that he put the jacket on, tightened all the straps as much as he possibly could, literally to make Robert a sitting duck. And the Midnights didn't have to do a goddamn thing. All they had to do was patiently wait for Robert to get fully fastened. And that was their chance to strike. Like sharks smelling blood in the water. That is precisely what happened. Robert is completely defenseless. And as the people start screaming and pointing in the direction of where the Midnights are coming from, you see Ricky and Robert look over their shoulder and be like, oh shit. So Ricky is desperately trying to yank this straitjacket off of Robert. To no avail. And while Jim's stomping and choking away on Robert, Bobby and Dennis are dogpiling Ricky and beating the teetotal shit out of him. Hitting him with a spike pile driver, putting him in the Boston Crab so Bobby can do a leg drop over him. And again, all of this taking place because the babyfaces had to show everyone what JC would look like in a straitjacket. You know, I'm usually not the one that likes to point out when the babyfaces are made to look like absolute morons. But what the hell did the Rock and Roll expect? They just presumed this wasn't going to end in tragedy? I mean, it's silly for one. But you can't even really blame the Midnights for taking advantage of a situation here. Ricky and Robert stepped right into that mud pit. May as well just had a sign that read, fresh meat. Good Lord. In any case, well, that left us with the TV main event of Ted DiBiase versus Johnny Mantell. The return match for DiBiase, since he was wrestling Johnny Mantell, had to figure Mantell was going to have to get his shit in before doing the job. So he basically beats up DiBiase for 80% of the thing until DiBiase cuts off a monkey flipped attempt and then locks in the figure four for the submission. I hate Johnny Mantell so much, dude. Every single time I see him wrestle, he does something that just pisses me the fuck off. I need The Rock to be standing at ringside going, know your role, jabroni. Always had to get himself over when nobody was asking for it. So after DiBiase wins, he goes over to the announce position to try to cut a promo about what he plans on doing next week. There's a great moment here where mid-promo, you casually see an arm extend into the frame of the microphone so DiBiase can grab it and then continue to talk so people can actually hear him. And he basically let everybody know that he's going to try to stir shit up with Master G. Hey, someone's got to work with them, right? If anybody can get something remotely watchable out of Master G, it's got to be DiBiase, am I right? But what a show, man. Some really, really impeccable stuff happening this week. Stuff with Duggan, DiBiase's return, the rock and roll angle with the Midnights, Ernie Ladd becoming the new North American champion. I mean, this really reminded me of a lot of those earlier episodes from '84 where every single segment had something memorable attached to it. And again, for anybody that's never seen that Hacksaw Duggan promo on this episode, stop what you're doing right now and go watch it. If you want to see real, genuine emotion, there's your poster child. Without all the dramatic soap opera-y bullshit. God, what a promo. Excellent stuff. Alright, so we're back at this again for another 9 weeks. 9 more weeks of world-class coverage, folks. It's been quite the journey over the last 3 years, but a journey that's kind of reached the point of no return. We're coming off the heels of the Cotton Bowl at Texas Stadium that did a really piss-poor attendance figure. Bad weather and all. Kevin Von Erichs, the new World Heavyweight Champion. It was nowhere near the level of emotion or gravity as Kerry winning the NWA World Heavyweight title from Ric Flair in 1984. But that whole situation was already a mess with everything that happened with Chris Adams. You know, I really don't want to harp on this show too much, just because we're already running really long, and to be honest, I don't really have a lot of constructive criticism when it comes to this show. Just more of the usual bitching and moaning about how incredibly dull and lackluster the booking is. Doesn't get much duller than how they open, with Lance Von Erich taking on the alleged man of the 80s, Spike Johnson. Not kidding you. That was his self-proclaimed gimmick name. The man of the 80s. He was definitely a man of the 80s. The man? Not buying it. I think I mentioned in a previous review that I knew virtually nothing about Spike Johnson, aside from hearing the name in passing maybe once in my life. He was a big guy that could do a handful of power moves. To say he was an athlete of any description would be giving him too much credit, judging for the 5 minutes I saw him wrestle here. They had a very slow-paced match that looked like two guys wrestling with anchors attached to their heels. The most memorable thing was when Lance got dumped to the floor. Bill Mercer drew attention to their new blue flooring at the Sportatorium. Translation, they finally put blue padding down around ringside. That was going to fix the problem in World Class. We need outside padding. Lance won with a middle rope drop kick. I think it was a drop kick. I wasn't paying close enough attention, and no, I did not care enough to go back to find out. Then we had a Kevin Von Erich interview. It was our first time seeing Kevin with the belt since Texas Stadium. And the premise of this interview stemmed from Mark Lawrence informing Kevin that while it's great that he's a new World Heavyweight Champion, with that comes a great deal of responsibility. That was how he opened. Right. Yeah, talking about responsibility when it comes to the way the Von Erichs were conducting themselves around this point. That aged poorly. In addition to him promising to be a fighting and honorable champion, Kevin also talked about the high stakes every time he steps in the ring. Remember, the world-class rulebook stipulates that all champions have to win their titles by pinfall or submission. DQs and countouts don't work in their favor, because titles can still change hands on those rulings. So he vows that he's going to give 110%, whether he's wrestling here in the States or over in Japan or Malaysia, which is apparently where he was scheduled to go after this interview. It was a fine promo. Mark did say here that Kevin has plans on holding the title for a very long time, which I think wound up being true. Didn't he hold the belt for well over a year before he finally dropped it? In any case, we then pitched you some pre-tape footage from Fort Worth. It's a Steve Simpson Bam Bam Bigelow match. Or, I'm sorry, not Bam Bam. He was still going by the Crusher at this point. Crusher Yurkov, to be more specific. While he was working over Simpson, he had Larry Sharp cutting a promo over Lawrence's headset, asking for real suitable competition in world class. It's your pretty standard big guy, little guy underdog match. Again, Bam Bam was very green by this point in his career, but you could still tell he had a lot of potential. Glad he settled on different ring gear eventually, because, yeah, the wife beater and gym shorts were not a good look. It wasn't even until halfway through this tape where I realized that it was a TV match with $10,000 at stake. I guess that was part of Sharp's stipulation ahead of time. If anyone could beat the Crusher in 20 minutes or less, they'd win a $10,000 purse. So right as Simpson's making his comeback and closing in on victory, goes up for a big move, but ends up getting crotched by Larry Sharp behind Rick Hazard's back. Then Crusher immediately got the cover in the pin. Pretty simple heat segment. I don't know if this is something they're going to run with on TV, where they build to a babyface challenger who can finally pin the Crusher and win the money. They have 9 weeks to pay it off. Elsewise, we'll never know who finally knocked off the Crusher. So then we went back to the Sportatorium for Perry Jackson versus, oh dear God, Master G. Yeah. Just when we thought we had enough of him in Midsouth circa 1984. Now he's popping up in Dallas a couple years later with an insanely god-awful fucking blonde dye job. And approximately 60 pounds heavier. So, if I remember the timeline correctly, in 1984, he was about to sign with the WWF before plans changed, and then he wound up going to work for Midsouth for a brief period. Then by the end of 84, he did wind up signing with the WWF. Spent a year or two working as mostly a prelim guy, and then apparently, news to me, I had no idea he ever worked in Dallas after he left the WWF. Sure as shit. Here he was. Blonde hair, beer gut and all. And as a heel, no less. For reasons that were not explained, he was being managed by Percy Pringle. Because why not? I know this is awful, but this was basically George Wells' midlife career crisis. His JYD career crisis, no less. Showing up in a new territory, out of shape, fatter and less motivated than we've ever seen him. Still can't get over the blonde hair. I thought Cody Rhodes was going to have a hard time pulling out the blonde dye job. That eventually grew on me. More so than that god-awful neck tattoo. Master G with blonde hair. No bueno. Hideous. They had a bad match that ended with one of the worst cradle pins I've ever seen anybody pull off. It looked like Master G was going for that Master Lock submission he was trying to get over in Midsouth a couple years prior. But instead of calling it like a submission, Bronco just counted a pin. I don't know. Another segment that left me depressed and contemplating every decision I made about continuing to review World Class in 1986. It didn't get any better, by the way, with Brian Adias versus Mike Von Erich, which wound up being the main takeaway from the show. And I know what everyone's thinking. Wait, hold on a sec. Brian Adias? Former childhood friend of the Von Erichs? Why is he being booked to wrestle one of his friends? Well, he certainly wasn't a heel going in. By the end of it, the story was much different. This was one of those examples of them trying to fast-track a heel turn that really should have been handled by building up to over a series of weeks. Instead, they just went straight to the turn without any real motive or rationale, other than Brian was getting outworked by Mike and he got jealous or something. They're having a pretty shitty babyface match. There's a moment where Brian trips over Mike and takes a bump to the floor, but Mike doesn't want to count out because he's a professional. He wants to give Brian a chance to recover and get back in. And so he does. They continue to wrestle for a bit longer. By that point, Mike is well in control of the pace. And Brian really can't seem to get anything going offensively. So things eventually boil over when Brian goes to shake Mike's hand. But then he kicks Mike in the gut and sucker punches him to set up the comeback. And he ends up going over with the Russian leg sweep after nearly leaving Mike in a crippled heap. And you know, they're treating it like a big shocking moment that nobody saw coming. Which it was, because, well, there was no reason for anybody to suspect it was coming. It was never teased. And it's not to say that it was bad, but again, why exactly? How did they ever give any indication that Brian was jealous or bitter about the Von Erichs? So we're to believe he did this because Mike was out wrestling him? Because that's pretty much what they indicated here. I guess that would be something to be angry about. Getting out wrestled by Mike Von Erich. I'd be pretty bitter about that too. Now, they explained it a little bit afterwards, but I'm hoping they spend at least a few weeks kind of going over everything, because it's weird. Like, I remember Brian turning heel on the Von Erichs. It wasn't necessarily a major storyline that they devoted a lot of attention to, but the setup here seemed very hastily thrown together, and it really didn't make sense given how Brian wrestled the entire match. He went from total professional to a downright asshole in the flip of a switch. I can buy that he was frustrated, but to just outright turn entirely and start being a complete raging douchebag, it's a little hard to buy. I won't belabor it, though. I said I wasn't going to spend an hour trying to talk about this show. So we'll go to the main event. The Dingo Warrior versus Matt Bourne. And like I said, Adias came out here and said a few words. Told everyone that he has no friends in world class. The only thing he's concerned with right now is being next in line for a world heavyweight title shot. It wasn't much of an explanation, but to a lesser extent, he addressed his motive. So they at least gave us that much, for what it's worth. Probably don't need to sit here for the next several minutes and tell you how god-awful the Warrior was. Even Matt Bourne couldn't really get much out of him in this 8 or 9 minute match. Warrior spent half the time putting Bourne in a stationary headlock. And Bourne turned the tables to get some heat for a few minutes. Bill Mercer channeling his inner Eric Bischoff by calling a back suplex a double reverse backflip. That got a chuckle out of me. And well, here was their grand comeback they set up for the Warrior. He gave Bourne an atomic drop, which Bourne did not sell. Then he gave him another atomic drop. This time, Bourne took a bump into the ropes and then flung himself backward. I presume the reason he didn't sell the first one was because they were intending to do that spot initially, but they were out of position. So they just did it again. Then Warrior chopped Bourne out to the floor, which resulted in Percy handing Bourne his walking cane so he could attack the Warrior with it for the DQ. Then, of course, he ran off the heels almost immediately because, well, the Warrior is big, bad, and strong. He was morphing into the Ultimate Warrior before our very eyes. No selling the heat and immediately making his own comeback. Gotta love it. Like I said, the Brian Adias turn was the main selling point for the show. But even with that, I really didn't have many outstanding thoughts about it. It's not like Adias versus Kevin Von Erich is this money-making world title match is going to sell out the big stadium show in '87. I know they were desperate for a money feud at this point. But if they actually thought turning Adias heel was the ingredient to making people want to buy tickets again, I honestly don't even know what to say. It wasn't going to happen. It was nowhere near the level of heat of Freebird slamming the cage door into Kerry's head. Not trying to argue that's what they were going for. But there are a lot of similarities we're seeing right now with Kevin winning the world title at Texas Stadium. Now they got former best friends of the Von Erichs stabbing them all in the back and leaving them high and dry in the middle of the ring. Can't say it's a total carbon copy, but you can tell they're trying to retrace some old steps. Going back in the time machine and picking out booking ideas that stuck once upon a time. Just doing it now on a way lesser scale. But there you go. Brian Adias is now a heel. Fan-fucking-tastic. Wasn't gonna change a thing. So, that'll wrap it up there. Again, this is gonna be a long show, so I got a hell of a lot of editing to do over the next day. Folks, I want to thank everybody for stopping in to check out the show. And we will be back on Monday for another Retro Raw installment. Always appreciate the support. And talk to you all soon. Take care. Peace out.